She saved the Don's wife after 9 minutes underwater and joined their Mafia family overnight anew. The sunset bled purple and liquid gold over Raven's Inlet, but the real display had already begun. Fireworks celebrating the grand opening of the Vescari private marina screamed skyward. They exploded in deafening showers of sapphire and emerald, their reflections shattering like colored glass on the black, churning water of the bay. The air smelled of sulfur, expensive champagne, and the deep, cold salt of the Atlantic. Savannah Hale, known only as Vanna, watched from the edge of the pier. At 24, she was a pre-hospital EMS trainee, pulling a freelance shift with a private station just to clock the hours. She wore the practical Navy uniform, her rescue diver certification a quiet patch on her sleeve. She was practical, decisive, and unimpressed by the wealth. She was just watching the water, a habit she could not break. The chaos started not with a bang, but with a whine. A sleek, mahogany speedboat, carrying Mirella Vescari, the wife of Don Aldo Vescari, drifted near the main channel. Suddenly, its engine roared, a high-pitched scream that cut through the orchestral music. The boat lunged forward, hooked hard left against the current, and flipped. It went over, belly up, with a sickening crunch of fiberglass and wood. The music stopped. Shouts tore through the air. Vanna did not wait for an order. While others pointed and screamed, she was already moving. She kicked off her heavy boots, shedding her EMS utility belt but snapping the safety knife rig to the waistband of her pants. She took one running step and dove cleanly off the pier. The water was a thermal shock, instantly stealing her breath. It was colder than the air, black and viscous. The salt burned her eyes. She blinked, fighting the sting, trying to orient herself. The visibility was less than 1 meter. The water choked with silt and thick algae. Bubbles rose from somewhere below. She kicked down, following the only trail she had, the faint glimmer of a gold necklace, sinking slowly, catching the last light of the fireworks above. The clock in her head started. 3 minutes lungs burn for air. 5 minutes cognitive function starts to drop. 7 minutes irreversible brain damage begins. She found Mirella trapped against the submerged hull. A thick anchor line, carelessly left on the deck, had wrapped around the woman's ankle, tethering her to the sinking wreck. Mirella was not moving. Vanna drew her knife. She sawed through the thick rope, the serrated blade biting into the nylon. The line snapped free. Mirella was limp, a dead weight. Vanna wrapped her arms around the woman's chest, shoving the knife back into its sheath, kicking hard, her own lungs screaming. She dragged them both over the slippery curve of the overturned boat and broke the surface. The total time from submersion to the first gasp of air, 9 minutes. On the dock, the world was chaos, but a different kind. Men in sharp, black suits had formed a perimeter, throwing down their own expensive jackets to create a dry, clean space. They moved with an efficiency that was not civilian. One man directed them. He was perhaps 32, with a stillness that contrasted the panic. This was Julian Rook, Don Aldo's right hand. He saw Vanna break the surface, dragging her charge. "Here," he commanded, his voice a low gravel that cut through the noise. He knelt, not to help Vanna, but to secure the scene. As Vanna heaved Mirella onto the dock, Julian was already checking the perimeter, his eyes suspicious, assessing Vanna as a variable, not a savior. But he stayed, his hand landing on Mirella's chest, ready to assist. "She's in V-fib or asystole. Get back," Vanna ordered, shoving Julian's hand aside without looking at his face. She didn't have her paddles. She began compressions, hard and fast, counting aloud. "I need my kit, the green one." A guard shoved it toward her. She didn't stop compressions, instead ripping open a packet for nebulized epinephrine. She didn't have an IV. She administered it using a makeshift technique, forcing the mist into the airway between rescue breaths. "Come on, breathe, breathe." On the third cycle, Mirella's body arched. A violent spray of salt water and foam erupted from her lungs. She gasped, a raw, wet, rattling sound. Her eyes fluttered, a heartbeat, thready and weak, returned. The crowd, held back by the suited men, let out a collective roar of relief. The crowd parted. Don Aldo Vescari moved through them. He was not a large man, but the space he occupied seemed vast. He looked at his wife, now wrapped in his own suit jacket, and then his eyes, calm and cold as the bay itself, settled on Vanna. He did not shout. He did not thank her. He observed. "You just pulled my heart from the bottom of the bay," he stated. It was not gratitude. It was an acknowledgement of a transaction. In that instant, Vanna felt the true structure of the night, the invisible framework of power that held this marina, this city, and now, perhaps, her, as if summoned by the shift in power. New sounds cut through the air sirens, not EMS, but official. 2 sets, wailing from the mainland. Julian Rook was beside her instantly, his shoulder blocking her from the crowd. He spoke low, his breath warm against her ear, the suspicion in his eyes replaced by a grim necessity. "That's the Bureau of Organizational Response and the Maritime Integrity Commission. Feds. If they start questioning you now, citing procedure, you won't leave this dock until morning. They will turn your life inside out before the sun rises." Vanna was freezing, adrenaline draining away, leaving her shaking in her soaked clothes. Before she could process Julian's warning, a weak hand gripped her wrist. Morella Vescari, pale and shivering, looked at her. Her voice was a watery rasp, but her grip was steel. "Stay," she whispered. "Tonight." It was not a question. It was a command, a lifeline, or a chain. The offer hung in the air, suspended between the sulfur of the fading fireworks and the cold, unending smell of the sea. They did not take an ambulance. They took a black sedan that materialized from the chaos, its windows tinted to an opaque, reflective black. Casa Vescari was not a house, but a fortress of limestone and glass perched on the highest cliff overlooking the inlet. The salt spray misted the windows, but the air inside was warm, controlled, and silent. Morella was moved to a private medical wing that rivaled any trauma bay Vanna had ever seen. A man in a crisp white shirt and slacks, introduced only as Dr. Ara, was already waiting. Vanna, wrapped in a heavy blanket that smelled of cashmere, stood shivering as they transferred Morella to a diagnostic bed. "Hypothermia stage 2, secondary to immersion," Vanna reported, her voice automatic, falling back on the familiar script of a medical handover. "Estimated 9 minutes submersion in water approximately 58 degrees Fahrenheit. Witnessed inverted capsize. Full submersion, she was tangled in an anchor line. Initiated CPR on the dock. Administered nebulized epinephrine due to lack of IV access. She regained spontaneous pulse and respiration just before transport." Julian Rook stood in the doorway, arms crossed. He had already changed into a dry, black shirt. He watched Vanna, not the doctor. He had expected hysterics, or perhaps the fawning gratitude of a civilian. He had not anticipated this clinical precision. The girl who had looked like a drowned rat on the pier was now calmly directing a medical professional. Her terminology, flawless. He registered the competence, and it filed her away in a different mental category, one more complicated, perhaps more dangerous. "Thank you. Miss Hale, we have it from here," Dr. Aris said, a tone of dismissal in his voice as he applied sensors to Morella's chest. "She will need dry clothes." Julian's voice cut in. It was an order, not a suggestion, and it was directed at a passing maid, not the doctor. Downstairs, the atmosphere was thick with a tension Vanna could taste. The federal sirens were closer, now stationary, their flashing lights painting the walls of the grand foyer in pulses of red and blue. Julian guided Vanna to a wide stone terrace overlooking the marina below. The entire area was now a federal crime scene. "Abor and Mike," Julian said, his voice low, a deep rumble against the sound of the surf. "They have sealed the scene." Vanna watched a man in a dark blue federal windbreaker, Agent Reed Hollander of the Bureau of Organizational Response, directing the searchlights onto the overturned speedboat. They were not treating this like an accident. "Hollander is already making noise," Julian continued, as if thinking aloud. "He's suggesting the boat self-started. He's using the word sabotage loud enough for the press boat to hear. He thinks someone wanted Morella dead." Vanna's mind flashed back to the dark, churning water, the feel of the boat's hull. "It wasn't the rope that stopped her from getting free," she said, almost to herself. Julian's head snapped toward her. "What?" "The boat. When I was cutting her free, I had to brace against the motor housing. I saw the fuel line. It was severed. A propeller could have cut it in the flip." "No," Vanna said, shaking her head, the memory sharp and clear, burned there by the adrenaline. "It was a clean cut, smooth, like it was done with a specialized blade. It was not frayed, not chewed by the engine. It was cut before the boat ever flipped. It was not an accident, Julian. It was deliberate." Julian's dark eyes narrowed. He processed this new information, his expression unreadable. He had only been testing a theory. She had just provided the proof. Don Aldo Vascari found them there. He had not changed. He held a small, heavy-bottomed glass of amber liquid. "The feds will want to talk to the rescuer," Aldo said. His voice was calm, almost bored, as if discussing the weather. "They will demand reports. They will want timelines. They will sequester you for 72 hours, perhaps longer." "I will just tell them what I saw," Vanna said, her hands tightening on the cold stone railing. "And they will twist what you saw," Aldo replied, taking a slow sip. "They will say you contaminated the scene. They will ask why you, a simple EMS trainee, were the only one there to see this cut fuel line. They will paint you as an accomplice." He swirled the liquid. "I have a proposal. For tonight only, you are my family's internal medical advisor, retained to oversee my wife's recovery. You are not a witness. You are privileged staff. Vascari Protection will handle the lawyers. Agent Hollander will not get within 50 feet of you." The offer hung in the air, a shield that looked suspiciously like a cage. "I am not," Vanna started. "I am not one of your staff." "Tonight," Aldo said, his voice dropping, the warmth gone. "You are." He turned and walked back inside, the discussion clearly over. Vanna was left alone with Julian. The silence stretched, broken only by the rhythmic crash of the waves far below. "He's not asking," Julian said quietly. "He's telling you how you survived the night." He stepped closer, his shoulder blocking the view from the house, his voice dropping so low she had to strain to hear him. "A word of advice. In our house, gratitude is a rope. If you know how to untie it, you can save someone. If you do not, you hang yourself. Aldo just threw you the rope. Be careful how you hold it." A maid brought Vanna dry clothes, simple black scrubs and a cashmere sweater that were far too soft to be standard issue. She found Morella awake, propped up on pillows, the high-tech medical equipment in the room humming a quiet counterpoint to the storm outside. Morella's hand, though weak, found hers and gripped it. "You," she whispered, her eyes clear and sharp. The fog of the water gone. "You did not hesitate." "It is my training," Vanna said, uncomfortable with the intimacy. "No, I saw your face just before you dove. That was not training. That was a choice." Morella squeezed her hand. "Thank you. I run a small charity, a foundation. We work with women from the port, trying to get them out of difficult situations, anti-trafficking." Her eyes darkened. "It does not make me popular. I suppose I know who to thank for the fuel line." Vanna felt a chill that had nothing to do with the water. This woman was not just a Don's wife. She was a target. When Vanna left the room, the atmosphere in the hallway had shifted. The few guards and household staff she passed looked at her differently. The whispers had already begun. Traveling through the stone corridors of Casa Vascari, the EMS girl, the one who pulled the Don's wife back after 9 minutes underwater. It was a mix of awe and deep suspicion. She was no longer just a girl. She was an event. She was an asset. Or a threat. Don Aldo met her by the main staircase, a spiral of marble that seemed to hang in the air, unsupported. "The feds have been turned away at the gate," he said simply. My lawyers are handling the reports. You will stay in the guest wing. We will decide what comes next in the morning." Vanna stood at the precipice. Julian was right. This was the choice. She could demand to leave, call her station, and walk into the flashing blue lights of Agent Hollander. She would be an insignificant trainee, alone, telling a story about cut fuel lines that no one would believe. Or she could stay in the house, protected but entangled. She was escorted to a room larger than her entire apartment, where the entire wall facing the sea was one single pane of glass. She was alone, isolated. Her personal cell phone, which a guard had retrieved and silently returned, dried in a bag of rice, suddenly buzzed. It was an unlisted number. She answered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Hello?" The voice was electronically distorted, a low, metallic rasp. "You saved the wrong person. Little fish, do not let Viscari use you as a puppet. Get out of that house while you still can." The line clicked dead. Vanna stared at the phone. The fear that gripped her was colder than the Atlantic. It was not the sea that scared her. She understood the sea. The sea was dangerous, but it was honest. This was different. This was the land, and the land was full of shadows and whispers and ropes. She walked to the window, looking down not at the sea, but at the high, closed gates of the compound far below. Vanna Hale agreed to stay one night. She had joined their world, overnight anew, with the chilling realization that in the Viscari family, the sun rising did not mean it was safe. It just meant you could see the danger coming. Breakfast at Casa Viscari was not a meal. It was a changing of the guard. It was served in a sun-drenched solarium that smelled of sea salt, fresh espresso, and the sharp scent of orange blossoms from the grove just outside. Don Aldo Viscari sat at the head of a long, polished table, not eating but listening. Men in immaculate suits, looking more like Wall Street executives than the muscle Vanna had seen on the docks, would enter, speak in low, respectful tones, and then depart. They discussed restaurant supply chains in the city. They reviewed transport logistics for the container yards down the coast. They argued over disbursement schedules for the Viscari Family Foundation, Morella's charity. Vanna, seated at the far end of the table, watched it all. She was witnessing the flawless, legitimate face of an empire built on something else entirely. The restaurants, the shipping, the philanthropy, they were all woven together like a complex anchor line, impossible to untangle, and strong enough to hold a battleship. Vanna's one night had bled into a third day. She was an anomaly. She was the hero who had saved the queen, and now she was a guest who refused to leave. She knew, with the practical certainty that defined her, that she could not just be an honored guest. That was a form of slow death. She needed utility. She found Julian in a small, dark room off the main hall that served as the estate's security hub. He was watching a bank of monitors. "I am going insane," Vanna announced, her voice flat. "If you do not give me something to do, I am going to start color-coding your ammunition." Julian did not look away from the screens. "We are not an EMS station. Hale, we do not have volunteer hours." "No," she agreed, stepping into the room. "You are a high-risk compound with a recently targeted principal. Your medical wing is state-of-the-art. Your field kits are a joke." She pulled a sealed tourniquet from her pocket and tossed it onto his desk. "This expired 2 years ago. If one of your men takes a hit in the leg, he's bleeding out while you are trying to remember which drawer you put the new ones in." A flicker of interest in his eyes. He finally turned. "Fine. Audit the house, the cars, the marina, everything. You are now our internal safety consultant." He became her shadow. He issued her a temporary key card, a heavy gray plastic square with no name on it. "This gets you into the medical wing, the gym, and the docks," he said, his voice a low monotone. "It does not get you into the Don's office or my server room. If you try, it sends an alert to my phone, and a mild, non-lethal electrical shock to your hand." "You are a sadist," Vanna muttered, clipping the card to the waistband of her new black scrubs. I am a security professional, he corrected, a thin smile touching his lips for a fraction of a second. There is a difference. As she took inventory of the main trauma kit in the hall, he leaned against the wall, arms crossed. He was simultaneously her guide and her inquisitor. We ran your background, he said casually, as if discussing the weather. Savannah Hale, 24, no family, bounced around the state foster system, honorable discharge from the Army, where rumor was you were fast-tracked for combat medic, but you quit. Then the rescue diver certification, then the EMS program. You do not seem to be running from things. Vanna, you seem to be running toward the next fire. And you, she countered, not looking up from a box of IV catheters, you just stand in the middle of the fire and pretend it is not hot. I am the fire extinguisher, Hale, he said, his voice devoid of humor. I just get to decide which fires are worth putting out and which ones to let burn. The tension of the house was briefly interrupted by warmth. Morella, recovering with remarkable speed, summoned Vanna to her suite. The room was filled with flowers, but Morella's gaze was sharp. Aldo will want to compensate you, Morella said, her voice stronger. He sees the world in transactions. I see it in people. She touched Vanna's hand. I looked you up. You are still paying off the loans for your trainee program. Let us pay for the full paramedic certification. All of it. Vanna stiffened. I do not want charity. It is not, Morella said firmly. It is an investment. I want you to run the water safety program I am starting for the women at the harbor. Teach them CPR. Teach their children not to fear the water. You have the certification. You have the credibility. Who better to teach them than the woman who pulled me from the bottom? Meanwhile, the outside world was pressing in. Agent Hollander and Abor were making noise, demanding interviews. The Maritime Integrity Commission, citing ongoing procedural review, refused to release the salvaged speedboat back to the Viscari family. They are stalling, Julian said, reviewing the official request in his office. They are letting it sit in salt water, corroding the evidence. A rumor had trickled up from the docks one of the Viscari loyal boat captains, a man who had worked the marina for 20 years, had vanished the night of the accident. A mole, Julian stated. He must have been the one who compromised the engine. Vanna, now officially overseeing the marina's safety gear, went to the Viscari dive locker. It was meticulous, but she checked everything. When she inspected the secondary anchor on the boat that had been moored next to Morella's, her fingers brushed against a texture. She pulled out her keychain UV light. A small, perfect circle glowed purple on the anchor's shackle. A UV marker. Someone tagged the position, she told Julian, showing him the photo. This was not just about cutting a fuel line. This was about timing. They knew which boat, when it would be there, and exactly how to stage the scene. Julian nodded grimly. The enemy knows our schedule. They knew the duty roster. They knew the camera blind spots. Don Aldo's response was not explosive, it was corporate. He did not send men with guns, he sent a memo. Within 12 hours, all security codes at the marina were changed. All shift rotations were randomized. Drivers were reassigned. The third-party technicians who serviced the engines were replaced by an entirely new firm from 3 states over. To the outside world, it looked like a routine, if sudden, security upgrade. To the inside world, it was Don Aldo Viscari Cleaning House. Vanna and Julian fell into an uneasy rhythm. They became an unwilling team. She saw the details he missed: the saltwater corrosion on a hinge, the hesitation in a guard's eye. He handled the people, translating her blunt observations into actionable orders. A fragile, unspoken trust was forming. She was reading the physical scene. He was reading the human one. This fragile truce was shattered late that night. A notification appeared on her phone, a text from an anonymous number. There was no message, only an attachment. Vanna opened it. It was a photograph. It was her, on the dock, in the chaos of the rescue. She was leaning over Morella, her mouth on the other woman's, giving rescue breaths. The photo was sharp, clear, and taken from a high angle, from the roof of the Marina Clubhouse or a nearby building. Someone had been watching. Not just the boat, not just Morella. They had been watching her. Vanna's blood ran cold. This was not a warning. This was a trophy. They were showing her they were close, that they had been there, that she was part of the narrative whether she liked it or not. She stared at the image, at the desperation, and focused on her own face. That anonymous call, "Do not be a puppet," echoed in her head. She looked at the picture again. She was not a puppet. She was the one who had been in the water. She was the only one who had seen the cut. She made a decision. She was not just a medical advisor. She would not just take Morella's money and teach CPR. She would find the person who started that engine. She would find the person who took this picture. She would find the person who tried to kill the woman who had, just hours before, offered her a future. The Vescari family projected an impenetrable calm, which Vanna was learning was more dangerous than open rage. To prove the failed attack had not shaken them. The end-of-week fundraiser for Morella's charity proceeded as planned. The venue was the Glass House, a high-end jazz club built on the roof of a converted warehouse, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a glittering, panoramic view of Raven's Inlet. Vanna stood near the bar, uncomfortable in a borrowed silk dress that felt like armor. She was introduced as Morella's personal attaché, a title that meant nothing and everything. Julian was nearby, a ghost in a perfectly tailored suit, his eyes sweeping the room, the exit, the sky, never staying still. Morella was at the center of the room, laughing, the perfect hostess, her presence a defiant answer to last week's violence. The jazz trio was in the middle of a smooth, quiet riff when the sound came. It was not the loud crack Vanna expected. It was a sharp thwack, like a heavy stone hitting metal, followed by the crystalline explosion of the main window over the bar. Chaos erupted, people screamed and dropped. "Sniper!" Julian roared, his voice cutting through the panic. Vanna did not look for the source. She looked for the target, Morella. But Julian was already moving, and he was not moving toward Morella. He was moving toward Vanna. He crossed the space in 2 strides, tackling her just as a second shot pulverized the marble bar top where she had been standing. His body was a solid, heavy weight shielding her. His arm hooked around her waist, pinning her to the floor. "Stay down," he snarled in her ear, his breath hot, his focus absolute. "Morella," Vanna yelled, struggling under him. "She is the target." Vanna twisted, looking past his shoulder. She saw a Vescari guard near the stage clutch his shoulder and fall, a dark, pumping stain spreading across his white shirt. He has hit arterial bleed. Julian was already moving, pulling her up. "Get Morella." Vanna scrambled across the floor, slick with spilled wine and shattered glass. She reached the guard, her silk dress instantly soaked. She ripped a heavy linen napkin from a table, grabbed a decorative steel skewer from a fallen appetizer tray, and slammed it against the man's arm. High in the axilla, she twisted the skewer, creating a makeshift tourniquet, biting deep. The pumping blood slowed to a dark ooze. The room was plunged into chaos by a new sound, the piercing, electronic shriek of the fire alarm. "It is hacked!" Julian yelled, grabbing Morella and Vanna, shoving them toward the kitchens. "They are flushing us. The elevators are a kill box." The sprinklers kicked in, unleashing a torrent of icy water, drenching the panicked crowd and instantly ruining the illusion of the glass house. "This way," Vanna shouted. Pulling ahead, she had reviewed the building's safety schematics as part of her new duties. The kitchen service exit, the wet way. Julian nodded. Shoving Morella ahead of her, they burst through the double swinging doors into the stainless steel kitchen, past terrified staff, and into a narrow service corridor. The alarms were deafening here. Vanna led them into the walk-in cold room, a shortcut to the freight elevator bank. They were not alone. 2 men, dressed in kitchen whites but holding switchblades, blocked the far door. They had been waiting. One lunged at Julian. Julian met him with brutal efficiency. There was no finesse, just a rapid series of movements, a block, a redirected thrust, and a heavy, solid impact as Julian used his forearm to strike the man's throat. The second man, seeing Vanna and Morella as the softer targets, came straight for them, his knife low. He cornered Vanna against a rack of frozen meat. Morella screamed. The man lunged, aiming for Vanna's stomach. Vanna reacted on instinct. She did not have a weapon, but she had her tools. Her hand snapped to the small, curved rescue hook she wore on a clip at her waist. It was designed to cut seat belts and rope. As the man thrust, she dropped her weight, catching his wrist in her left hand. In the same motion, she brought the hook up, burying its sharp, curved point into the back of his hand, severing the tendons. The man roared, his hand spasming, the knife clattering to the tiled floor. Before he could react, Vanna drove her knee into his solar plexus. Just as he doubled over, Julian was there, bringing the butt of his pistol down on the base of the man's skull. The attacker collapsed without a sound. An hour later, they were back at Casa Viscari, wrapped in blankets, the adrenaline fading into a harsh, vibrating exhaustion. Julian studied the security footage. They were professionals, but they wanted it to look amateur. He pointed to the screen. The signal to the fire alarm was triggered by a call from a public payphone 3 blocks away. A simple hack. They wanted us to think it was a disorganized scare tactic. Morella, her face pale but her eyes hard, watched the footage. "It is the Mallory Alliance," she whispered. Vanna leaned in, hearing the name for the first time. "It is their style," Morella continued. "They like to make their attacks look cheap, like random street violence. It gives them plausible deniability with the other families. They hide their sophistication behind a mask of incompetence." Don Aldo Viscari stood at the window, looking out at the dark, unforgiving sea. He had not spoken. When he finally turned, his voice was dangerously quiet. "We will not respond with bullets," he said. "The Mallory are dogs, but they are someone's dogs. We will not retaliate. We will find the truth. We will find the man holding their leash, and we will present his actions to the council. Let them see his disrespect. They will be the ones to tear him apart for us." The room cleared, leaving only Vanna and Julian, the silence thick with the night's events. "The Mallory Alliance uses Pier 9 as a front," Julian said, his voice flat with fatigue. "A legitimate cold storage facility. They move produce for the city's restaurants. They also move machinery. We think that is how they move their other assets." Vanna looked at him. "You need eyes inside." "I need your eyes inside," he corrected. "You are our new safety consultant. You know OSHA regulations. You know what to look for, what is out of place. You will go in tomorrow, a surprise safety audit for the city. They will not just let me walk in. They will know I am Viscari." "Not if you are with me," Julian said. "I will be your city-appointed engineer, checking structural integrity. They will be so busy watching me. They will not pay attention to the woman checking their fire extinguishers." 2 hours before dawn, the Viscari sedan was replaced by a rusted, dented, dark blue work van. Vanna, in stained overalls and heavy work boots, pulled her hair back into a tight bun and jammed a generic beanie on her head. She was pale, the adrenaline hangover visible in the dark circles under her eyes, but her hands were steady as she clipped a fake ID to her belt. Julian, also in worn work clothes, paused as he watched her. His gaze lingered for a moment, tracing the line of her jaw, the absolute focus in her eyes. This was not the woman in the silk dress. This was not the trainee on the pier. This was the woman who had dived into black water and used a tool to break a man's hand. He saw, for the first time, a reflection of his own hardened resolve. "Ready, Inspector?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "Let's go, engineer," she replied. They drove to the industrial waterfront, the van rattling and smelling faintly of oil. They parked in the shadow of Pier 9, a massive, corrugated steel warehouse that hunkered against the dark water. Julian cut the engine. The silence that fell was absolute. There was no cell service here, blocked by the thick metal and the interference from the port's radar. A single, rusted steel door squeaked as Julian pulled it open, revealing only a narrow, dimly lit corridor. They stepped into the cold, damp dark, and the heavy door slammed shut behind them, the sound final. They were cut off. They were inside. The air inside Pier 9 was 10 degrees colder than the docks, thick with the smell of brine and old machinery. The main floor was a cavern of stacked, frozen goods. But Julian led Vanna toward a narrow administrative corridor, their fake IDs and clipboards giving them just enough cover in the poorly lit hall. "The main offices are dead," Julian murmured, his voice low. "The real work happens in the sublevels." He used a generic key to open a janitorial closet, then pressed his hand against a seemingly solid concrete wall. A section of shelving clicked and slid open, revealing a steel staircase descending into the earth. The cold was sharper down here, biting through their overalls. This level was not for storing produce, it was for high value, off-the-books logistics. Julian used a small thermal imager. "The walls are insulated, but one room is running hot. Right there." He pointed to a reinforced steel door marked electrical. Vanna, using her safety inspector pretense, jimmied the cheap lock with a tension wrench. The room was not an electrical closet, it was a workshop. On a workbench, amid soldering irons and wiring, lay a small green circuit board. Vanna's breath caught. She had seen one just like it in her EMS tech class. "That's a customizable timer," she whispered, pulling out her phone to take a picture. "The same kind you would use to create a remote ignition, or a delayed one, just like on Morella's boat." "They are building them here," Julian said, his eyes scanning the room. He pointed his thermal imager at the back wall, and that's why... The wall, which looked like solid metal, was glowing with heat. "That's a false wall. There's a black room behind it, a server room. They're not just moving machines, they're moving data." They found the release mechanism behind a fire suppression panel. The wall hissed and opened onto a tiny, cramped room, suffocatingly hot, filled with a rack of whirring mini-servers. Julian plugged a data exfiltration tool into the main port, the progress bar on his small device crawling. "What are you looking for?" Vanna asked, her eyes scanning the desk, which was covered in shipping manifests. "The real ledger. The Mallory are just muscle. I want to know who is paying them, and how." Vanna snapped photos of the manifests. The routes were bizarre, originating in international waters and terminating at dummy corporations. Then she saw the payment ledger. It was not in dollars, it was cryptocurrency, and it was all being funneled through a single, repeating beneficiary, the Blue Wave Preservation Fund. "Julian, ow," she said, her voice tight. "This NGO, Blue Wave Preservation, it's a shell." "Of course it is." "No," she insisted. "Look at the funding approval, the address for their charter." She tapped the screen of her phone, zooming in on the document she had photographed. "That's the regional headquarters for the Bureau of Organizational Response, ABOR. The same agency investigating Morella's accident. They're not just linked, they are the same entity." The air in the tiny room felt as if it had been sucked out. This was not a simple mafia war. This was a conspiracy, a partnership between organized crime and the federal agency meant to stop them. Julian's device beeped. The download was complete. "We have the drive. Let's go." As he ripped the cracker from the port, a deafening klaxon began to wail. A harsh, red light pulsed through the complex. "They cut the patrol time short," Julian snarled, grabbing her arm. "Someone knew we were here." They did not go back up the stairs. Julian kicked open a maintenance vent and shoved Vanna through. Emerging into the main cold storage warehouse, guards were shouting, their voices echoing in the vast frozen space. "This way," Julian pointed. "Loading Bay C, but we have to lose them." He pulled her behind a wall of stacked ice, then shoved open the door to a massive, walk-in ice chipper. He pushed her inside, into a massive, insulated container filled with crushed ice, and pulled the heavy door shut, plunging them into absolute, freezing darkness. They could hear the guards running past, their boots pounding on the metal grate. Vanna and Julian were pressed together in the dark, shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip. The cold was instant, seeping into their clothes. They were breathing the same small, frigid cloud of air. Vanna was shaking, but not from fear. It was the cold, the adrenaline crash. I hate this, she whispered, her teeth chattering. The cold or the small spaces. Julian's voice was a low vibration. So close to her ear it felt more like a thought than a sound. The water, she said, the confession slipping out in the dark, the deep, the cold. She took a shuddering breath. I almost drowned when I was 16, fell through thin ice on a lake. I was under for, I do not know, a long time, long enough they revived me. She felt him turn his head toward her, his breath brushing her temple. Since then, she continued, her voice barely audible, I have been obsessed with it, but terrified. That's why I learned to dive. I joined the Army for the combat medic training, but I got my rescue certification first. I figured if I was going to be afraid of something, I should be the master of it, so I would never be trapped like that again. So I would never run from it. The silence stretched, filled only by the sound of their breathing and the distant shouts. Then, a sound Vanna had never heard, a low, soft, almost non-existent laugh from Julian. It was rough, unused. I used to be afraid of the blue lights of an operating room, he admitted, his voice a quiet rumble against her. Saw them every night in my dreams, the hum of the machines, the smell of the antiseptic. He paused. It is the one place I will not go. It was a piece of him, offered in the dark, a trade for her own, a mystery she did not understand, but filed away. The air between them, once just cold, now felt charged with the weight of their confessions. The footsteps were fading. Now, Julian said. He shoved the door open, the sudden light blinding. They ran. They burst onto the main loading dock just as a Mallory guard in a black uniform rounded the corner. He raised his weapon. Julian shoved Vanna toward the edge of the dock. Jump! They dropped 10 feet, landing hard on the steel roof of a container barge below. The guards scrambled down the ladder, chasing them. Vanna, seeing him coming, ran to the edge of the barge. A massive cargo net was suspended from a crane, ready for loading. As the guard closed in, Vanna grabbed the heavy steel release lever for the net. With all her weight, she pulled it down. The guard, his momentum carrying him forward, did not have time to stop. He ran directly into the kill zone. The net released. The guard fell with a shout, tumbling into the soft, deep, and hopelessly tangled bed of ropes below, instantly immobilized. Julian grabbed her hand. This way! They leaped from the barge to the pier and vanished into the pre-dawn fog, the klaxon of Pier 9 fading behind them. Back at Casa Viscari, as the first gray light of dawn touched the sea, they plugged the drive into a secure terminal. The data flooded the screen, files, bank transfers, and the source of the orders. It was all there, authenticated by a digital signature Celia Grant, a Boer Northeast Regional Director. Don Aldo Vescari stood over the monitor, his face carved from stone. He did not celebrate and he did not smile. He looked at Vanna, then at Julian, his gaze heavy. The truth, Don Aldo said, his voice quiet, it has a price. It is not free. Are you willing to pay it, Miss Hale? Vanna looked at the screen, at the name Celia Grant. She looked at Julian, who was standing closer to her than he had before, the accidental intimacy of the ice container still lingering, a dangerous, unresolved warmth. She had a choice: walk away, take the paramedic money and forget this, or stay. She nodded. I am. She was trading her last bit of peace and any illusion of a safe distance from the man standing next to her. The Raven's Inlet Aquarium was a sphere of glass and blue filtered light, a stark contrast to the industrial grime of Pier 9. It was student day, and the main hall echoed with the high-pitched shrieks of children. Vanna and Julian, now disguised in the aquarium's dull blue maintenance uniforms, moved through the chaos with purpose. Their target was a small security office near the main tourist exhibits, which ABOR was using as a temporary command post to oversee maritime safety for the aquarium's new expansion. Grant is meeting the aquarium director at 10:00, Julian murmured, pushing a cleaning cart. The bug goes in the power conduit behind her desk. And you are sure the Mallory will make a move? Vanna asked, her eyes scanning the crowd, checking sightlines, exits. They cannot help themselves. They are undisciplined, and Grant is arrogant. Julian said, "She will want to flex. Show the Viscari family she owns the water, even here." As if on cue, the lights in the main hall flickered and died, plunging the massive Shark Tank exhibit into a deep, ominous twilight. The emergency lights, a sickly green, kicked in, but the massive pumps that circulated water to the Shark Tank whined and fell silent. An electronic lock on a staff-only door near the tank clicked and froze. A young aquarium employee who'd been cleaning the inside of a service hatch was now trapped, his arm caught in the automated, watertight door just as the power failed. He was half in, half out of the tank. Panic erupted. Children screamed. ABOR agents, including Reed Hollander, emerged from the office, guns drawn, shouting about a security breach. Vanna saw the employee. She saw the water in the tank, dark and still. She saw the man's face, white with panic, his arm pinned. "Julian, the manual release for that door is on the inside of the tank," she said, already shedding her utility belt. "Vanna, no, this is the distraction. We plant the bug and we leave," Julian commanded, his hand gripping her arm. "He will lose his arm," she said. She looked at him, her gaze flat and absolute. "He's trapped. I am not." Before he could stop her, she was moving. She grabbed a small emergency rebreather from the life safety station on the wall, vaulted over the tourist railing, and dove into the dark. Silent Shark Tank. Julian's world stopped. He stood frozen, his hand outstretched. He watched her figure disappear into the blue-black water, through the massive, curved acrylic. He saw her swim, a pale shape moving with terrifying purpose through the deep. Sand sharks, confused by the lack of current, swirled around her. He watched her kick to the bottom, find the manual release lever, and put her entire body into forcing it open. The man on the other side was pulled free. Julian's breath was gone. His fear of the blue, the cold, the water, the operating room was a cold stone in his gut. But it was now eclipsed by a new, sharper terror. He was not afraid of the water. He was afraid for her. She surfaced in a spray of water, gasping, and hauled herself out. Julian was on her in an instant. He did not check on the employee. He grabbed Vanna's arm, his grip bruising, and dragged her away from the ABOR agents, who were busy shouting into radios. He pulled her through a door marked, "Pump Room, No Entry." They stumbled into a cavern of heat, noise, and vibration. The auxiliary pumps were thrumming, filling the air with a deafening, rhythmic roar. The room was hot, humid, and smelled of ozone and hot metal. It was just the two of them, isolated by the wall of sound. They were both shaking, soaked, their breath coming in ragged gasps, the adrenaline of the past week, the cold of Pier 9, the tension of the sniper, and the sudden, icy plunge, all of it crested at once. "Are you insane?" Julian yelled over the sound of the machines. He still had her arm, his fingers digging in. "You could have been killed for what? For a civilian?" "He was trapped," she yelled back, yanking her arm free. "That is what I do." "Not anymore," he roared. His control, the iron discipline he wore like a suit, finally shattering. He grabbed her by the shoulders, his face inches from hers. "You are not an EMS trainee anymore. You are—" He stopped, the words failing him. Vanna stared back at him, her chest heaving, water dripping from her hair onto his hands. She saw it in his eyes, the fear. Not for the mission, not for the family. Fear for her. His hands, the ones that were always so steady, were visibly shaking. He looked at her, at the water on her face, at the fierce, defiant light in her eyes. The roar of the pumps was a heartbeat, surrounding them, enclosing them. Slowly, as if fighting his own body, he released his grip on her shoulders. His hand came up, his thumb brushing the cold bay water from her cheek. The gesture was tentative, a question. It was the first gentle touch she had felt from him. She did not answer with words. She leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. And then, with the same decisiveness she used to dive into the water, She rose up on her toes and closed the small distance between them. The kiss was not soft. It was a collision. It was desperate and angry and relieved. It tasted of salt water, adrenaline, and every unspoken word between them. Julian's hands, no longer tentative, found her waist, pulling her hard against his soaked shirt, lifting her slightly off the floor. He kissed her back with a hunger that matched her own, a raw, protective force. Her hands, cold and wet, tangled in his hair, gripping him, anchoring herself to the only solid thing in her world. It was not a gentle exploration. It was a confirmation. You are alive. I am alive. We are here. The heat of the room and the heat of their bodies met, steam rising from their clothes. The world reduced itself to this single point of contact, this desperate shared breath in the roaring dark. A sharp, electronic crackle cut through the noise. Julian's radio, clipped to his belt, sputtered to life. Sector clear. Grant is moving back to the office. Repeat. ABOR team is moving. They broke apart. They stood for a second, foreheads resting together, breathing each other's air. The roar of the pumps rushed back in, filling the sudden silence between them. Another time, Vanna, he whispered, his voice rougher than she had ever heard it. A time when we are not running. A time when we are not running, she agreed, her voice shaky. The fire, now banked, burned hotter for being contained. They got the bug in place just as Grant returned, complaining loudly about the aquarium's third world infrastructure. The audio feed was crystal clear. They heard Grant dismiss Hollander. They heard her make a call. The asset is in place, Grant said. Code Blue Wake is a go for the mayor's gala. We will make the Vescari look like amateurs, and the Mallory will be the only alternative for port security. The plan was clear, another staged accident on the water, this time to publicly humiliate or eliminate a Vescari rival, framing the family for the attack. As they walked back to the van, Vanna's secure phone buzzed. It was Morella. We have a problem. Morella's voice was tight with a new fear. Cousin Rafe, our internal accountant. He's gone. He vanished from the house an hour ago, and Vanna... He took the complete ship maintenance and scheduling logs with him. Vanna stopped. She looked at Julian, the heat of his kiss still on her lips. The mole was not a boat captain. The mole was family. Julian met her gaze, his own eyes hard, the brief warmth from the pump room already banked, replaced by cold resolve. He looked at her, her hair still dripping, her face set, and he knew that they had crossed a line. We are not just surviving anymore, Hale, he said, his voice quiet but absolute. We are choosing how to live. The revelation of the mole hit Casa Vescari like a physical blow. Rafe Vescari, cousin Rafe, the quiet accountant who had managed the family's legitimate books for 2 decades. The data from the aquarium bug, combined with his sudden disappearance, painted a devastating picture. He did not just take the maintenance logs, Julian said, his voice a low, cold monotone as he stared at the security feed from the empty accounting office. He took the ledgers, the ones for Morella's charity. He just handed Celia Grant a perfectly wrapped, fabricated case for money laundering. He's not just a traitor, he's the architect of this whole thing. The betrayal was precise, the response was immediate. The rumble of heavy vehicles on the drive was their only warning. The gates of the estate, usually an impenetrable fortress, were breached, not by the Mallory, but by a convoy of armored black SUVs, their roof lights flashing a tidal wave of red and blue. Agent Reed Hollander, the ABOR agent from the marina, stepped out with a tactical team, his face smug. Donaldo Vescari, he announced through a bullhorn, we have a federal warrant to search the premises in connection with an ongoing financial crimes investigation. But Hollander did not go toward the dawn. He and 2 armed agents burst into the security room where Vanna and Julian were. He pointed a finger, not at Julian, but at Vanna. Savannah Hales out, he barked. We have a warrant for your arrest, tampering with an active crime scene. Pier 9. Julian stepped in front of her. She was never at Pier 9. We have clear footage of your van, Hollander sneered. and a witness who saw you both. You are interfering with a federal investigation." "Julian," Don Aldo's voice came over the intercom, sharp and clear. "The tunnel. Now. Do not let them take her." The order was absolute. Julian grabbed Vanna's arm. "We run!" They did not wait. They sprinted from the room, alarms blaring. They fled through a cold, damp service tunnel, one Vanna had inventoried days before, burrowed deep into the cliffs. They burst out onto a rocky, hidden beach, the sound of federal agents shouting echoing behind them. They were fugitives. They ran until the sirens faded, replaced by the howl of a building storm. Julian hotwired a Viscari-stashed pickup truck, and they drove north, hours up the coast, the rain lashing the windshield. Their destination was Gray Spire, a desolate finger of rock that jutted into the Atlantic. At its very tip, defiant and dark, stood an abandoned lighthouse. The inside was a cold, circular room filled with the smell of rust, mildew, and sea salt. The wind shrieked through the cracked lantern glass high above, a lonely, terrifying sound. Julian smashed a rotting wooden crate, using the pieces to start a small, sputtering fire in the lighthouse's old iron stove. They were soaked to the bone, their breathing ragged. As Julian stoked the flames, Vanna saw the blood dripping from his hand. A long, deep gash ran across his palm, a wound she had not seen before. "You are bleeding," she said. "It is nothing. The glass in the tunnel," he dismissed, wincing as he clenched his fist. "Sit," she ordered, her EMS voice cutting through the storm. He stared at her for a beat, surprised by her tone, but he sat on the cold stone floor. She retrieved her small, waterproof trauma kit from her belt. Her fingers were numb, shaking from the cold and the adrenaline, but her movements were practiced. She poured antiseptic directly into the wound. He did not flinch, just watched her face. As she began to apply pressure, her trembling hands met his steady one. She meticulously cleaned the wound, her touch gentle, clinical, and yet profoundly intimate in the small, flickering light of the fire. The rain turned to a deluge, a solid, roaring curtain of water that sealed them in. They wrapped themselves in a heavy, dusty canvas tarp, their shoulders pressed together, sharing the meager warmth. "We are not just fugitives," Vanna whispered into the noise. "We are the scapegoats. Rafe set up Morella, but Grant set up us. She wanted us to run. She knew we were at the aquarium. Did not she? She let us plant the bug." Julian was silent for a moment. "I do not think so. She's arrogant, but not that precise. This is just her capitalizing on our move. She has us isolated." He shivered, the cold finally breaking through his control. Vanna shifted, moving closer, pressing the length of her body against his. It was a practical move, a sharing of body heat, but it shifted the air between them, the proximity no longer accidental. The memory of the pump room, of that desperate, life-affirming kiss, hung in the small, dark space. He turned his head. In the dim, orange light, his face was all shadows and sharp angles, his eyes unreadable. "Vanna," he breathed, the name a raw sound against the storm. His uninjured hand came up, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. It was a question, a slow, hesitant request. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes, giving the answer he was looking for. When his mouth met hers, it was not the frantic collision of the aquarium. This was slow, deliberate, and deep. It was a kiss of exhaustion, of fear, and of a profound, shared understanding. It was a promise in the dark. He pulled her closer, the rough canvas falling away as his arms encircled her, his body a solid, warm wall against the cold. She kissed him back, her fingers tangling in his wet hair, anchoring herself. This was the only shelter they had. His lips moved from her mouth to her cheek, his breath warm. His hands were slow, respectful, mapping the curve of her waist, the line of her back. He found the hem of her shirt, his fingers brushing the skin beneath, and he paused, his gaze asking. She nodded, her breath catching. There, In the howling dark, they held each other. They did not speak of the mission, or the betrayal, or the chase. They whispered the things the light kept hidden, the scars on her arms from a childhood spent in motion. The reason he always looked at the escape routes in a room, it was an exchange of vulnerabilities, a deep, quiet consensus. It was the love of two adults, choosing to be a refuge for each other, stopping when one simply needed to breathe, and just holding on, their breathing finally falling into a shared rhythm. Vanna woke to the gray light of dawn. The rain had softened. Julian was already awake, staring into the dying embers. "The blue light," Vanna said, her voice soft in the quiet. "You said you were afraid of the operating room." He did not look at her. "I was a combat medic," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Army, 17th Airborne, back in the States. My younger brother was in a car accident, a simple one. Broken femur, pneumothorax, a simple fix." He clenched his good hand, but he got stuck in the system. Insurance paperwork. The on-call surgeon was delayed. They kept him in a hallway. He died waiting for a signature. He finally looked at her, and she saw the raw, burning anger he kept banked behind his eyes. "I was pulling men through hell on the other side of the world, and my brother died because of bureaucracy. That is the blue light I hate. Vanna. The antiseptic hum of a system that is too slow to care. I hate red tape more than I hate the Mallory. Celia Grant. She is the red tape." Vanna now understood the man beside her. She pulled out her phone, which she had kept in a waterproof pouch, the backup copy of the drive from Pier 9. "Julian," she said, her voice urgent, "the Blue Wake file. It is not just a plan, it is a full tactical folder. The target is the mayor's yacht gala. This week, they are going to stage an attack, make it look like the Viscari, and Abor is going to ride in as the only agency that can restore order." He stood up, the pieces clicking into place. She's not just seizing control, she's manufacturing the crisis she needs. "We have to stop her," Vanna said. "We cannot. We are fugitives. We show this to anyone. Grant buries us." "No," Vanna said, standing with him. "We do not show anyone. We take it. We take the whole thing. We cut Grant out at the source." The plan was insane. Her data hub, Julian said, the idea forming, dangerous and bright. Harbor Switch, it is the central nervous system for her entire coastal operation. If we get in... "We do not just get the Blue Wake file," Vanna finished. "We get everything, her offshore accounts, her blackmail, her connection to Mallory. We burn her to the ground." "If we fail," Julian said, his voice grim, "we are not just arrested, we are erased. No one will ever look for us." They spent the next hour in the cold. Gray light drawing on the back of an old, faded nautical chart, Vanna's anatomical knowledge mapping the building's weak points, Julian's tactical mind planning the infiltration, vents, power grids, patrol routes. When they were done, Julian took the pencil. At the bottom of the complex diagram, he wrote two small words, "Quiet breakfast." He looked at her, the simple, impossible promise hanging in the air. Vanna finished tying the knot on his bandage. "It will hold." They walked to the door. The storm had passed. The air was sharp and clean. The rising sun was a raw, red line on the horizon, turning the dark, agitated water to fire. It was not an ending. It was an opportunity. Harbor Switch was not a building. It was a black cube of concrete and steel squatting on the industrial waterfront, the humming, invisible heart of Abor's coastal operations. The digital clock on the stolen van's dash read 3:10 a.m., the shift change, the brief window when the night crew was tired and the morning crew was late. The air was cold, smelling of diesel in the river's muddy floor. The access card was courtesy of a Viscari-owned casino and a low-level technician with a catastrophic gambling addiction. Julian swiped it. The lock clicked green. 2 minutes, Julian murmured, his voice tight in Vanna's earpiece. That is how long we have before the system flags the unscheduled entry. The interior was a morgue of cold air and the high-pitched whine of servers. The main server room was a raised floor cage, protected by a web of blue lasers. "My turn," Vanna whispered. She moved to the massive air conditioning unit that fed the room. Her target was the maintenance gantry that ran above the laser grid. She climbed the cooling rack, her movements fluid, finding purchase on pipes and struts. At the top, she straddled the gantry. "I am over the grid," she reported. "The lasers are pressure and motion sensitive," Julian said. "They will see you." "They will not see mist." Vanna pulled a small, pressurized canister from her belt, a canister of condensed steam. She sprayed it into the air below her. The superheated vapor hit the cold air and condensed instantly, creating a thick, white fog that billowed downward. The blue lasers became solid, visible beams in the mist. Vanna moved along the gantry, her body contorting, moving over and under the lines of light, a silent acrobat in the fog. Below her, Julian moved to a power junction box. He did not cut the power. That would trigger a primary alarm. Instead, he opened the panel and attached a bypass, simulating a minor, insignificant power flicker, a brownout. "Now," he said. He triggered the device. The lights in the server room flickered, and the automated maintenance alarm chirped, then silenced itself. Reset by the simulated surge. For 60 seconds, the laser grid was offline, registering as undergoing maintenance. Vanna dropped from the gantry, landing silently on the raised floor. She moved to the central fiber optic port. Julian was beside her a second later. He did not look at the servers. He watched the door. Vanna attached the data tap, a small, black device that looked like a spider. She plugged in her drive, tapping the fiber. "I am in." The data flooded her handheld screen. She did not have time to browse. She needed the blue wake file. She found it, locked under 3 layers of encryption. She bypassed 2. The third was a voice recognition protocol. "Julian, I'm locked. It needs a voice key." "What is the file name?" he asked, his eyes still on the door. "Blue Wake Gala, Tactical." "Try authorization grant Celia," he said, his voice flat. Vanna typed it in. The file remained locked. "No, it is a spoken phrase." "The arrogance of these people," Julian muttered. He looked at Vanna. "The bug at the aquarium, her call. What did she say?" Vanna closed her eyes, replaying the audio in her head. "Blue Wake is a go," she whispered. She typed the phrase into the voice synthesizer. The file unlocked. The data was horrifying. It was not just a plan, it was a schematic. "Julian," she said, her blood running cold, "it is a pressure-activated detonator. It is in the engine room of the mayor's yacht. Time to the gala." She scrolled down. "Field supervisor responsible for activation and containment, Celia Grant. She is going to be on the damn boat." "She is not just framing the Viscari," Julian said, anew, cold anger in his voice. "She is the terrorist." Suddenly, a new sound, a change in the electronic hum of the building, a low-frequency alarm, not the loud klaxon of a breach, but the internal chime of a recall. "They are back," Julian said, grabbing her. "The rapid response team, they are early. They are coming up from the sublevel." "I am not done," Vanna yelled, trying to unhook the tap, her climbing harness still clipped to her belt, snagged on the server rack, the metal carabiner caught deep in a ventilation slot. She was anchored. "Vanna, now!" Julian was at the door. He saw her. She was trapped. The sound of boots was closer. Julian did not hesitate. He ran back. He did not try to free the clip. He drew his knife. "I said we do not leave each other," he snarled, and with one clean, violent motion, he cut the heavy nylon harness from her belt, leaving the expensive gear behind. He grabbed her hand and pulled her. They did not take the corridor. They burst through a fire exit, triggering the only alarm they did not care about. They ran onto the dark river pier and leaped, landing hard on the deck of a passing garbage scow. They were hidden by piles of refuse as the black-clad ABOR team flooded the pier, their weapons sweeping the empty space. 5 minutes later, hiding in the filth as the scow chugged toward the city, Vanna plugged her drive into a secure, encrypted laptop. She initiated the transfer. The entire file grant, the bomb plot, the Mallory connection, the offshore accounts was sent to a dead-drop server belonging to the Portlight Independent Press. "It is sent," Vanna breathed, her hands shaking. The condition is set. They publish the second they receive a signal from an anonymous source. The moment we confirm the bomb is neutralized, the world knows. Julian's secure phone buzzed. It was a coded text. He read it and nodded. The Don agrees. He will not touch Rafe. He understands. Rafe is the bait to get us to Grant. He will have Rafe at the gala. A second message came through. This one was to Vanna's phone, from Morella. It was not a text, just a picture, a pickup location. They found the package in a newsstand lockbox. Inside, there was no note. There was only a single, heavy, beautifully crafted gold hairpin, shaped like a stylized trident, a Viscari family totem. Vanna looked at it. It was a final, silent gesture. I trust you. The final piece of the puzzle was in the box with the pin. It was not a note. It was a blueprint, a copy of the mayor's yacht. Julian, Vanna said, tracing a line on the paper. They will have the deck, the engine room, and the hull locked down. There is no way in, he said, studying it. Yes, there is, Vanna said, a slow, cold smile touching her lips. She pointed to a small, secondary line on the schematic. They will guard the air, and they will guard the doors. They will not guard the water intake. This is an auxiliary stabilization ballast. It feeds right into the engine housing. It is a 2-foot pipe. It is suicide. Vanna. It is a dark, flooded tube. The sea is my home. Julian, she said, her voice quiet. I am not afraid of the dark anymore. They stood at the edge of the pier, the first dirty light of morning staining the sky. The gala was tonight. This is it, Julian said. He looked at her, his face grim, the exhaustion of the last week etched into his features. There is a good chance we do not walk off that boat. Vanna met his gaze. I know. They did not kiss. They did not embrace. He just reached out and put his forehead against hers. A silent, powerful contact. If we do not come back, he whispered, his eyes closed. Tell them we chose each other, she finished, her voice steady. He pulled back, his hand brushing hers. Let's go to a party. The mayor's gala was a liquid constellation, a 300-foot yacht named the Inlet Queen, anchored in the bay, blazing with light. The air was thick with power, the smell of expensive perfume and the thumping, relentless bass of a live jazz band. The decks were a crush of silk, tuxedos, and ambition. From a podium on the main deck, Celia Grant, elegant in a sapphire gown, raised a champagne flute. She was smiling, her voice amplified, cutting through the music. In these challenging times, she projected, her gaze sweeping over the mayor and the city council. We must remain vigilant. We must invest in true maritime security. Her performance was flawless, the concerned, authoritative partner to the city. Near a stack of towering speakers, Julian, in the black polo shirt of a sound technician, checked a cable. His headset was looped around his neck, his body language a perfect portrait of an overworked, disinterested tech, but his eyes never left Grant. Far below them, Vanna Hale was a ghost. She moved through the black, cold water, her slim dive suit offering no resistance. The only sound was the muffled thump, thump, thump of the music, a physical pressure vibrating through the hull, a morbid heartbeat that matched her own. She swam beneath the shimmering, decorative float lights, using the darkness between them, pulling herself toward the massive, dark shape of the yacht. She found it, the auxiliary ballast intake, a 2-foot diameter pipe, just as the schematics had shown. She slipped her rebreather into place, pulled the grate free, and slid into the tube, pulling herself into the guts of the ship. On her private tablet, Celia Grant monitored the party, and the clock. She nodded to Agent Hollander, who was dressed in the crisp uniform of the yacht's private security. It is time, she murmured. The engine room. Make the accident look exactly like the file, a catastrophic, tragic failure of the port-side engine. Hollander nodded, his face impassive, and moved toward the lower decks. Vanna emerged into the engine room, a hot, deafening cavern of vibrating steel. She found the device immediately. It was exactly what the files described: a pressure-activated detonator, magnetically clamped to the main fuel line, designed to fracture the housing and make it look like a mechanical failure. Her hands, trained for the delicate work of saving a life, moved with the same precision to take one. She did not try to disarm the complex trigger. She opened the simple battery housing and pulled the power pack free. The device was inert. She shoved it into her utility pouch, in its place. She clamped the small, waterproof beacon. She pressed the activation switch. A tiny green light confirmed it was live, broadcasting its signal and the entire data cache to the Portlight press server. On the upper deck, Julian's burner phone vibrated. A single green icon lit the screen. Vanna is clear. Beacon is hot. Now, it was his turn. He found Cousin Rafe cowering near the aft railing, his tuxedo rumpled, a champagne flute trembling in his hand. "It is a long way down, Rafe," Julian said, his voice a low gravel, appearing out of the shadows. Rafe yelped, spinning, spilling champagne. "Julian, I was just getting some air." "You look like a man who is running out of it," Julian said, stepping closer, his body blocking Rafe's escape. "You gave Celia Grant the keys? Morella's charity, the ship logs. Why?" Rafe's face crumpled. "You do not understand. She had me, the gambling debts. She had me. She has everyone," Julian said. "What did she promise you?" The confession burst out of Rafe, a torrent of terror and whiskey. "It was not about the money. It was about the contracts. She said the Viscari were done, that the Mallory were just disposable muscle. She said she was going to frame the family for Morella's attack, and then this one tonight. She wants you declared domestic terrorists. She wants the entire port security contract for herself. She is not just taking over, Julian, she is exterminating the competition." In her command center, Grant's tablet flickered, a new, unauthorized signal, a beacon. "What is that?" she snapped, her smile freezing. "Hollander, what is that signal?" Hollander's voice, frantic, came over her earpiece. "Ma'am, the device. It is inert. The battery pack is gone." Grant's blood turned to ice. She saw the trap. "The girl, the EMS girl. She is in the engine room." The mask of civility vanished. "Forget the device, activate the secondary manual detonation now." "We cannot," Hollander yelled back. "The wiring is... It is different. And ma'am, the auxiliary valve, it is locked open from the outside." "Then lock it from the inside," Grant shrieked. "Seal the compartment, flood it now." Vanna was already back at the intake pipe when she heard the deafening clang of hydraulics. The valve, her only exit, slammed shut, sealed by a foot of steel. She was trapped. A moment later, she heard a new, terrifying sound, the roar of rushing water. They were flooding the compartment. Julian heard Rafe's confession and saw the panic in the eyes of the other Abor agents disguised as security. He knew. Vanna. He sprinted to the railing, ready to dive, but two of Grant's men, no longer pretending, grabbed his arms, slamming him against the bulkhead. "Let me go," he roared, fighting with a cold, desperate fury. But they had him pinned. Celia Grant picked up the podium microphone, her voice perfectly smooth, cutting the jazz band mid-solo. "Ladies and gentlemen, my apologies," she announced, her smile dazzling. "It seems we are having a slight technical difficulty with the port engine. Just a minor disturbance. My team has it fully under control." She looked directly at Julian as she said it, a silent, vicious promise. The water in the engine room was at Vanna's knees, then her waist. It was black, oily, and rising fast. She swam to the sealed valve, her hands searching for a manual release that did not exist. She was locked in. She drew her rescue knife. It was her only chance. She found a heavy gasket, a maintenance panel. If she could cut the bolts. The water surged, a powerful wave created by the ship's own systems. It slammed her sideways, pinning her. Her body was wedged, caught hard between the massive, vibrating engine block and the cold, unyielding curve of the hull. She was stuck. The water was at her chin. She tilted her head back, gasping, finding one last, small pocket of hot, stale air. The clock started. 1 minute. She was in the dark. The roar of the water filling her ears. 3 minutes. Her rebreather was choking, the pressure too intense. 6 minutes. Her lungs were screaming, hollow and aching. 8 minutes. Her muscles, starved of oxygen, were failing. Her vision was a darkening, green-tinged tunnel. She opened her eyes one last time, staring up through the black, churning water at the single, faint, green emergency light on the ceiling, on the deck, 50 feet above. Julian finally broke free of one guard, but was subdued by 3 more, pinned to the deck. His face turned toward the sea. He threw his head back and bellowed her name, a raw, guttural sound of agony that was completely drowned out by the cheerful, thumping bass of the band. The scene held. The woman who had beaten the water, the woman who had returned from 9 minutes below, was trapped. The clock was ticking again, and it was not slowing down. The clock in Vanna's head had passed 8 minutes. Her lungs were collapsing, her vision fading to a single, green emergency light. She was dying. Then, 50 yards away, hidden in the darkness, a small skiff's engine roared to life. Mirella Vescari was not at a safe house. She was at the gala. She had arrived not as a guest, but as a sailor. She knew this yacht, knew the Vescari-built engines that powered it. She slammed her hand down on an auxiliary console hidden in the skiff's hull. She was not starting a pump. She was triggering the emergency ballast flush, a failsafe only the ship's original designers knew existed. In the engine room, the world reversed. The crushing pressure vanished, replaced by a violent, sucking vortex as thousands of gallons of water were drawn backward. The force ripped Vanna from the machinery, tossing her like a rag doll in the churning, oily chaos. On deck, Julian saw the ship's stabilization gauges spike. He broke the grip of the guards, the snap of a wrist bone lost in the noise, and dove over the railing. He hit the water, his eyes scanning the dark. He found her, a pale, sinking shape. He hooked his arm around her chest, his legs kicking, driving them toward a maintenance float. He hauled her onto the platform just as the first sirens, summoned by the port light data dump, sliced through the night. "Vanna," he commanded, his voice raw. "Breathe." She was limp. He sealed his mouth over hers, forcing air into her lungs. One breath, a second, she convulsed. A violent, hacking cough that brought up salt water and oil. Her eyes snapped open. The fear was gone. The water had tried to take her, and she had refused. She was alive. As she gasped for air, the world above them exploded. The massive entertainment screens on the yacht flickered, the jazz music dying. They lit up, one by one, with the logo of the Portlight Independent Press. The data flooded the party. Celia Grant's digital signature, the schematics for the bomb, the offshore accounts, and then the audio file. Rafe's voice, frantic and terrified, captured by Julian's phone. "She wants you declared domestic terrorists. She is exterminating the competition." The silence on the yacht was absolute. The mayor, the politicians, the rivals all stared at the proof. "Shut it down!" Celia Grant screamed. Her mask of civility vaporized. "Shut it down now!" But it was too late. A new voice, booming from a federal helicopter thundering overhead, cut through her panic. "Director Grant, this is Central Command. Your authority is revoked. Effective immediately. Stand down. The MIC is boarding." The Mallory agents, disguised as security, saw the trap close. They drew their weapons. "Take the Don," one shouted. But Don Aldo Vescari simply stepped into the light, his hands open. "No more," he said, his voice calm, carrying across the deck. "Tonight, we win with the light." The Mallory men looked at the approaching MIC boats. They looked at the helicopter. They looked at the guests, who were now holding up their own phones, recording. The guns dropped, clattering onto the teak deck. It was not a defeat. It was a public surrender. Celia Grant made a final, desperate run for the captain's speedboat. She jumped in, fumbling for the keys. Vanna, hauled onto the deck by Julian, was shivering, soaked, but standing. She saw Grant. She still had Morella's gift in her hand. "No," Vanna whispered. With a sharp, accurate throw, she flung the heavy, gold Vescari hairpin. It spun, catching the light, and embedded itself deep in the boat's throttle control, jamming it. Grant stared at the pin, confused. It was the last second she would ever have. Julian landed on the boat, his force of physical impact tackling her back against the seats. The sharp final click of handcuffs was the only sound. Morella was the first to Vanna, wrapping her in a thick blanket, holding her tight. "Twice," Morella whispered, her voice thick with emotion as she held Vanna's face. "Twice. From the same water. You are not an ally, Vanna. You are not a guest. You are ours. You are family." It was not a ritual. It was a fact. Don Aldo stood beside them. He looked at Julian, then at Vanna. "Vescari Protection is now the Vescari Safety and Logistics Division," he stated. "Miss Hale will be its director, a full contract. Her first act will be to manage the Vanna Hale Water Safety Fund, endowed by my wife, to train every woman and child at the inlet." Vanna was too exhausted to respond. She just looked at Julian. He was bruised and bleeding, but he was watching her, the quiet pride in his eyes more potent than any promise. He reached out, his fingers just brushing the back of her hand. They did not need to promise forever. They just promised tomorrow, and the day after that. It was the love of two people who chose, every single morning, to show up. The epilogue was swift. A bore was torn down and rebuilt. The Mike rewrote their port protocols. The Mallory Alliance, headless and exposed, imploded. Raven's Inlet, finally, could breathe. At sunrise, 6 months later, a free swimming class was underway at the new Vescari Community Pier. Morella watched from a bench, laughing. Julian stood near the edge, a silent, watchful guardian. Vanna, in a simple red swimsuit, blew her whistle, her hair in a practical braid. She had saved the Don's wife after 9 minutes underwater. She had joined their family overnight, but she knew, as she looked at the water, that the rest of her life would be the slow, steady, daily choice to live decently in a world that was anything but. Thank you for listening to this story. We would love to know where you're listening from, so please comment and share your thoughts. Make sure to subscribe to Mafia Boss Story, like this video, and give us extra support by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.